Good evening. What do you fear? Crime? Cancer? Radiation? Asbestos? Terrorism? There's a lot to worry about. We've been told by politicians and the media that there's danger everywhere and it's all getting worse. But the fact is, it just isn't true. You may find this hard to believe given what you've been hearing in the media, but crime isn't exploding. New technologies are not shortening our lives. There are real risks to worry about, but we, for the most part, are worrying about the wrong ones.
When we return, some surprising news about America's worst fear, rising crime.
Crime. The polls say it's America's #1 concern. There's new get-tough federal legislation, a call for more cops on the streets, new prisons, longer sentences, new restrictions on our freedom in the name of public safety. We're spending billions on burglar alarms, guard dogs, mace, guns. We have to, right? Because everyone knows crime is spiraling out of control.
Tonight's top story.
A man was found stabbed to death.
Police are searching for suspects in the shooting of a woman.
Robber shot him in the head.
Anyone watching TV or reading the newspaper knows that terrible things are happening.
The victim's body was discovered in the trunk of a car.
Witnesses watched in horror.
And everyone knows they're happening much more often.
Today's shooting might leave you wondering how often.
Crime rates are skyrocketing. Never before has there been such an epidemic of crime.
It was a horrifying attack.
Another story, grim and frightening.
If the newscasters don't tell you, the politicians will.
It's very difficult to exaggerate the problem we face.
Since 1960, the rate of violent crime has increased by more than 500%. We've got a graph here.
But in fact, the crime rate isn't rising. What you've been hearing is wrong. How can this be?
Well, America gets its crime statistics from two sources, from the FBI, which adds up reported crime, and from the Justice Department, which surveys 160,000 people a year asking, were you a victim?
The Justice Department survey finds much more crime than the FBI does. For example, twice as many robberies, 3 times as much violent crime.
This is logical because most violent crime doesn't get reported. So among crime experts, these higher Justice Department numbers are widely regarded as the better, more reliable numbers, precisely because they take unreported crime into account. But here's the surprise. The Justice Department numbers, high as they are, do not show that crime is getting worse.
This graph tracks the past 20 years. That's all crime at the top, violent crime at the bottom. Neither has been going up. In fact, overall crime is down about 25%, and even violent crime is down about 2%.
Crime is not going up. It's been violent crime, especially, it's been essentially flat for a decade.
Criminologist Mark Warr is one of many experts who's frustrated by the public's misperceptions.
If you want to scare people with figures about crime, it is easy to do.
Here's how the media do it. This is the violent crime rate as reported by the FBI for the past 20 years. Entirely different from the Department of Justice numbers. The media heavily quote the FBI numbers, usually failing to mention that what's really going up is not necessarily the rate of crime, just the reporting of it.
We've seen large increases in reported rape over the last 30 years. Does that mean rape is going up? Possibly. But it could also be that women are more willing to report a rape today than they were 30 years ago.
In addition, with improved technology, it's easier to report crime data. And some police forces have also discovered an incentive to report more crime.
If I'm the chief of police and I haven't got money from the city for the last 10 years, my goodness, I may want to create a crime wave and scare the dickens out of everybody to get more money.
The second way we in the media scare you is that even when using the Justice Department numbers, we often leave something out.
This is USA Today. Violent crime is up 24%.
It is unforgivable to report changes in crime without standardizing for changes in our population. The numbers almost always go up because our population constantly increases.
USA Today got its up 24% by comparing the total number of violent crimes committed today with 20 years ago. But during that time, the population went up about the same amount. So your risk of being a victim stayed about the same.
What counts as crime per person?
Per person.
But that makes for a less interesting story. The myth of rapidly rising crime is so widespread, most every reporter believes it's true. On this ABC News special, media critic David Shaw said, correctly,
All the recent studies have shown that crime is going down.
Some crime is down, but violent crime is up.
No, violent crime is down. 27%.
Violent crime is also down.
While the press and public may be confused, the police chief knows the truth.
Crime overall, including violent crime, is going down.
But wait a second, how can crime be going down? We hear about so many more horrible things.
A young girl whose throat was slashed.
You have to remember that we live in a different kind of society than we lived 30 years ago. 30 years ago, crimes were pretty much local events. Today, the media function as what I call a large amplifier.
You can see one of the suspects right there on your video.
You hear about every crime that occurs in this society, often within minutes or hours after it happens.
We're live in Northwest Harris County.
Reporting live from Manassas.
Murder in the office.
And I must admit that my news program is guilty too.
Criminals dressed like cops, getting away with murder and robbery and rape.
And I've played a part.
John Stossel brings you a warning. Danger in disguise.
This guy still has his uniform.
But what should we do? Not report the crime? Or play it down? I find after I've gotten to know the victims, I want to sound the alarm to warn people.
I bought all this stuff on the phone.
Oh my
With
God.
no ID required.
But if we've made people with statistically little to fear too frightened about crimes like crooks posing as the police, we may have done a disservice. Because when you're too frightened, you give up some freedom. You accept restrictions that cut you off from other people.
In much of America, especially in the Southwest, a new idea is taking hold about what community is all about. They're called gated communities. It's kind of like living inside the fort. Some, like this one, give insiders special electronic devices that let them open the gates by remote control. Others open when you punch in a code. Some even have their own private entry guards who decide who deserves to get in.
And while prestige may be part of the sales appeal, security is the underlying theme.
Well, that's kind of what sold us on this. The gates. That when I'm gone, it makes her feel much, much more secure.
Martin and Barbara Flowers are thinking of moving to this gated community just outside Las Vegas.
This gate will keep the bad guys out.
I don't know if it's going to keep the bad guys out, but it's going to make me feel better.
Gated communities are also springing up all over California and Florida. Sales agents say they're selling houses behind gates as fast as they can build them, creating private enclaves, fortresses like something out of the Middle Ages, but with friendly names like Paradise Springs, Rose Walk, Bella Vista, all standing guard against the perceived dangers of the outside world.
I think crime is up everywhere, and I think the more things we can do to protect ourselves, the better off we will feel.
These people have been living in another gated community for several years.
My husband set me up here. He was dying and knew it, and so he wanted to set me up in a secured place.
But nothing ever really happened to you.
No, but you don't have people coming to your door that you don't know.
You're always saying it can't be me, but the potential certainly exists.
What if I were to tell you that the Department of Justice says crime really hasn't gone up?
You have a biased opinion.
Surveys show it's older Americans who are the most fearful.
They become hostages in their homes. They don't want to come out. They don't want to go shopping. They don't want to do anything because they have a fear. They start barring their windows. They start locking their doors.
Sheriff Johnny Mac Brown of Greenville, South Carolina, has his men call on the elderly to try to convince them that things aren't so bad.
We want to let them understand that they can go out and they can enjoy life.
But everybody knows the crime against the elderly is going way up.
Statistics don't prove that. Perception is going way up that they're going to be a victim of a crime.
You never know when it's going to happen. You just hope that you're not going to be the one.
At the local high school, there's some resentment against older folks who live behind gates.
They're insecure. That's basically what it is.
They don't accept us because we're kids. They think, like, if we play, like, we're going to mess up their neighborhood and stuff.
Some say it's racial.
What happens when you show up at the gate with your nose ring?
Well, I get harassed.
Certainly the gates reduce the chances of people mixing.
I mean, why would I want to mix it up with a teenager?
You can get in trouble.
I'm 56 years old. You know, I don't need, we have nothing in common.
The sad irony is, it's actually the high school kids who should be worried. They're 16 times more likely to be crime victims than the elderly.
It is reasonable or rational to be afraid of being murdered, for example, if you are a young black male in our society, because your lifetime probability of being murdered is something on the order of 1 in 30.
For those black teens, the yearly odds of being a victim of some violent crime is 1 in 6. They and their families have every right to be concerned. But for elderly white women, the chances of being a victim is 1 in 370. Yet it's the elderly who are the most afraid.
One reason for their fearfulness is the phenomenon of familiarity. If you don't get out and experience life, that makes you more afraid. A lot of you may be fearful of New York City, but to me, it's just my home. I spend lots of time in notorious Central Park, and I hang around in neighborhoods like this one where some of you might not feel so comfortable. But I feel safe here because I'm used to these places. I know it's not that dangerous. Familiarity, just getting out there, reduces fear of crime. So is it possible that we've scared you into a kind of jail? To living behind walls?
I think so. I do.
The fact is, many of the most violent crimes are not committed by strangers climbing fences.
Most homicides are committed by people we know. If you're going to be afraid of being murdered, you should be more afraid of the person who's watching this television show right now with you than the stranger who's coming into your house or that you meet on the street.
Child Sentry is a child tracking system.
Perhaps the saddest victims of this selling of fear are our children.
It takes only seconds for a child to be placed in a dangerous position.
Strangers rarely kidnap children, but you wouldn't know it watching TV.
Can our children ever really be safe?
We're teaching an entire generation of kids to be afraid.
I don't like strangers. I'm afraid they're going to shoot me or something, or poison me or something.
I've seen programs where the police come in and put identification numbers on the teeth of kids in case those kids are ever kidnapped and murdered. Now, what message are we giving to a young kid when we say we want to mark your teeth in case we ever need to find your body? We live in a society with 250 million people. Once in a while, these terrible things are going to happen to people. Should we all worry all the time?
Kid!
What kind of society are we going to have if no one trusts each other?
It's not my parents!
It tears the social fabric apart if we assume that everyone we run into is a criminal.
Of course, if you or a loved one is a victim, none of this means anything to you. If you live in a neighborhood where there's gang warfare, then you're right to be afraid. But the fact remains that most of us who are fearful live in places where crime has been decreasing.
When we come back, we look at what's more likely to injure us than crime.
For 20 years, I was a consumer reporter. Every day, somebody came to me saying, "This is dangerous. That's too risky. You've got to expose this." I could have done a scare story every day, but is that useful? We can't fear everything, can we? Recently, my own town fell under the spell of one of the latest scares, asbestos.
They have criminally destroyed lungs and children.
The number of inspection teams has risen to 52 at 9 a.m. this morning.
When teachers and parents complained that asbestos was flaking from school walls, New York City decided the schools would simply not open.
We will not allow any New York City student to be endangered by asbestos exposure.
Taxpayers spent almost $100 million. Some children cried, and the schools stayed closed while the worst of the asbestos was removed.
How can you sit there and tell us you can remove all of the asbestos in our building when it's virtually impossible?
All this uproar, yet most scientists who research asbestos and its dangers say closing the schools made no sense. Yes, heavy exposure to airborne asbestos, as happened to these shipyard workers, is unacceptably dangerous. But what the kids were exposed to in school wasn't a real risk. Still, how could politicians fail to act when parents like Evelyn DeJesus and Valerie Scott were so upset?
Now, some of these experts say your child's more likely to be hit by lightning.
Yes, but we can't accept that. We can't accept it.
Why not? What if
when
it's
experts
true?
say, when experts, they've been wrong before. Experts sometimes are wrong.
John.
And we can't play with people's lives.
Is any risk okay?
No.
Absolutely not.
I think it's horrible that it's in my school.
What might it do to you?
It can kill me.
Tiffany is Mrs. DeJesus' daughter. How would it hurt the children?
Like if a child touches the wall and that part has asbestos, and if they bite their nails, they can get asbestos in their lungs, and then later on in life they can die.
That is a terrible thing that a child should have to worry about such a thing. The risk of developing that is almost zero.
Dr. Stephen Levin's an activist who usually advocates more safety regulation. In this case, however, he says New York's attempt to remove asbestos probably spread more into the air.
The work made it worse?
Made it worse.
And exposed the kids to more danger. Because when they're not in school, kids often play in riskier places, like the street. How did we get to be so fearful of chemicals like asbestos that we end up exposing kids to even greater risks?
Love Canal near Niagara Falls has been declared an ecological time bomb.
It started in the 70s with the news that our environment might be killing us.
Love Canal was just the beginning. Once officials started looking, they found toxic chemicals throughout the nation.
These new invisible threats were especially frightening.
Contaminating the drinking water, killing cattle, making people sick, cancer, miscarriages, birth defects.
How safe is it?
I contributed to the fear.
Scientists say the most dangerous chemicals you can't sense. The government has now run tests on methylene chloride and found it causes cancer in rats.
Eventually, though, I started wondering about perspective. If these new chemicals are so dangerous, why are we living so much longer? I was there when the government evacuated the town of Times Beach, Missouri, because there was dioxin in the soil.
Dioxin is incredibly deadly.
Why were we reporters just standing here when the EPA guys were in spacesuits behind us? Years later, the government official who urged that the town be closed said, well, he may have made a mistake. And research at Love Canal has so far found no evidence of increased cancer. But that didn't get much publicity. The media had moved on. Now we were getting upset about other dubious risks. Might a chemical used on apples be deadly?
1 out of every 4,200 preschoolers could potentially develop cancer at some point in their lives just as a result of exposure to ALAR.
In a growing number of school districts, they are banning apples and apple products.
Perrier. Traces of the poisonous solvent benzene have been found in some samples, and every bottle in every store in America has been ordered off the shelves.
And the consumer advocates screamed about everything. The food.
It can spoil in your own refrigerator.
Watch out for poultry.
Chicken contaminated with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, sometimes contaminated with rat feces.
Do you eat hot dogs?
No. Hot dogs have a very low nutritional value. They have a high fat content.
Of course, flying is dangerous.
Inadequate maintenance.
And carpets are dangerous. We should all have bare floors.
Rugs are dirt collectors, and dirt collectors means indoor air pollution.
Phew, I need some coffee.
Well, caffeine's not very good for you. On the other hand, if you take decaffeinated coffee, sometimes the process to decaffeinate it has exposed the coffee to a chemical that isn't good for you.
I mean, you make it sound as if you should cringe when you get up in the morning. You make life sound terrifying.
No, life is preparedness. The old Boy Scout motto, be prepared.
Well, maybe that works for him, but I don't want to be that prepared. It's not the life I want to lead. Also, I don't know if worrying about all these things will prolong my life, but I'm sure it'll seem longer. Wouldn't it make more sense to rank risks so you could focus on what's really worth worrying about? Well, we've done that. For the past 3 years, we've been checking with safety agencies to find out what really kills people. The numbers are surprising. Despite all the publicity about new risks like cellular phones or product tampering, far more people are killed by ordinary things. Stairs kill about 1,000 Americans a year. Bicycles, 700.
And yet when 7 people died taking poison Tylenol,
do not take anything
Tylenol until further notice.
Americans spent more than $1 billion sealing products in tamper-resistant packages. It made us feel safer. Yet every year, 50 children, this girl was one of them, are killed by buckets. Ordinary 5-gallon buckets. Children fall into them and drown. It doesn't make news because buckets aren't new. Familiarity lessens fear. What I've learned studying these numbers is that the risks we in the media spend the most time talking about are usually not the biggest threats. Let's rank a few risks, though I should first explain it's not really fair to compare risks just by looking at how many people they kill. After all, when you're killed matters. The reasoning is that an accident that kills a child is more tragic than something that kills us when we're 70. Therefore, scientists who work in this field of risk assessment compare risk by calculating how much each shortens a life. How many days does each risk take off the average person's life?
Let's start with plane crashes. The media pay lots of attention to them, and how could we not? Commercial airline crashes kill about 200 Americans a year. Allowing for the millions who don't die, this means flying shortens the average life by about a day. Hazardous wastes may be a bigger threat. No one can agree on exact numbers, but the EPA fears that exposure to hazardous waste sites might kill 1,000 Americans a year. This would take 4 days off the average life. House fires kill almost 5,000 people. 18 days off your life. Pesticides could be even worse. Now, some scientists say there's no proof that pesticides kill anybody. But based on one EPA study, you could take the rather extreme position that exposure to pesticides kills 16,000 Americans a year. If it does, that would take 27 days off your life. The biggest environmental killer, air pollution, is thought by some to kill 50 to 60,000 people every year. That would shorten your life by 61 days. Crime is still worse. 26,000 Americans are murdered every year. 113 days off your life. Now compare all this to driving. Cars, by far, should be the bigger worry. 43,000 deaths. That's 182 days off our lives.
Which raises the question, if it's the role of government to make our lives safer, where should it focus its attention? Way up there on things that might take a few days off your life? Or here on something that shortens your life by half a year?
There are a lot of risks we ought to go after. The problem is, as a country, we're having our attention diverted to relatively small risks.
John Graham and his associates at the Harvard Center for Risk Analysis have spent the past 2 decades calculating how government regulations could be crafted to save the most lives. Graham has watched almost in disbelief as the government poured resources into fighting relatively minor risks.
Alar is out, cyclamate may be back.
As we saw with crime, one problem is headline hysteria. The politicians act when the public is frightened. The public is frightened by what it sees in the press.
What is news is not necessarily the biggest public health problem. The mysterious, the bizarre, the speculative make good news. But the day-to-day problems people have in traffic crashes, as they end up in the emergency room, thousands of Americans every day, that is the kind of problem that we need to get attention to, but that the media doesn't have a hook to sell it.
What really saves lives, say Graham and others, are simple things like smoke detectors, better crash protectors on highways, or just painting more lines in the middle of the road, boring remedies for ordinary problems. But money spent here would save far more lives than spending billions on things like asbestos removal.
There are so many hazardous chemicals and pesticides in the environment now that virtually every human being in the world is affected by them.
Scientists say many of our fears about chemicals are ridiculous. But just because scientists now can find microscopic quantities of poisons doesn't mean that those tiny doses hurt people.
The evidence on pesticide residues on food as a health problem is virtually non-existent. It's speculation.
But wait a second. Everyone knows we're in the midst of a cancer epidemic. Cancer rates are skyrocketing. Well, again, what everyone knows is simply wrong. Some cancer rates, like lung cancer, have increased. mainly because so many Americans took up smoking in the 40s and 50s. But other cancers, like uterine and stomach cancer, have gone down. Overall, cancer rates have stayed relatively level, say epidemiologists and cancer specialists at the National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, Harvard, Yale, the Mayo Clinic, and elsewhere. More cancers are recorded now because we have better early detection, and today more people live long enough to get cancer. But all the experts say there's no epidemic, and while it pays to be cautious about industrial chemicals, the public's fears are way out of proportion.
Why not try to get rid of every bit of risk we can?
I want zero risk. In my life, my daughters, my wife, we all want zero risk. The problem is if every citizen in this country demands zero risk, we would bankrupt the country.
Ralph Nader says every school bus should have seatbelts.
$1,800 more per bus to equip a bus with seatbelts is a pretty good protection.
That makes sense. We require belts in cars. Why not buses? But when the Harvard School of Public Health analyzed the benefits of belts on school buses, they concluded belts weren't worth the cost. Kids are much more likely to be killed getting off a bus. Inside the bus, they're relatively safe.
But given that it might save a dozen lives over the years, why not spend the money on the seatbelts?
You're engaging in statistical murder. When you decide to spend $50 million to save a few lives, when you could spend the $50 million to save 100 lives or 1,000 lives, that's a case of statistical murder.
Ralph Nader says we can afford to worry about everything.
We shouldn't try to set one victim society up against another victim society. In
Well,
a
how
kind
about
of,
one victim up against 50 victims?
But you don't come across that kind of choice. If you're a Food and Drug Commissioner, it's not your business to say, well, I think this budget should go into auto safety and not in food and drug.
Maybe the commissioner should say that. Consider this. Some safety regulations may even kill more people than they save. Recently, consumer groups and the airlines demanded that the FAA require infant seats for children under 2.
If we buckle our children up at 50 miles per hour, why not at 550 miles per hour?
Why not? One reason is that if I can't put my baby in my lap, it means I have to buy another ticket. This makes flying more expensive. Flying is much safer than driving. So if flying costs more,
That family will then be more likely to choose to drive than to fly. And that will be an increase in danger to that family.
So this would be a rule that would kill people.
It would result in more people being killed from driving than would have been saved on the airplanes.
so far, most of Congress apparently believes that critics like Graham are right. The bill hasn't passed. But comparisons like that are rarely made. People say, how dare you consider cost when a life is at stake?
The culture, the society only has so much money.
Bill Riley, who until 3 years ago was in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency, now believes his agency pours money into the wrong things. And pours is the word. The EPA's rules require that billions be spent in the name of safety.
Hazardous waste is the best example. We went much farther than was justified in terms of saving lives or protecting health.
Isn't this a little crazy?
Well, we live in a democracy, after all, and it shouldn't surprise us that we have set policy according to what the public's been most alarmed about. That has resulted in a sort of discontinuous series of crises, episodic events, which got a lot of publicity, television exposure, press attention, and resulted in Congress writing a new law. They did it because that was what the public was concerned about. Now, if you ask the question, how many lives are we going to save as a result of that kind of outlay, I think you have to reconsider some of those decisions.
And maybe we have begun to reconsider it. The politicians and risk specialists are at least talking about these things now. But of course, the huge bureaucracies we've built to regulate things, they're hard to turn around. They've got billions of our tax dollars, and they're going to spend them to protect us. In some cases, as we'll show you when we come back and visit the ski resort, they're going to protect us even if we don't want their protection. We all want the government to protect us from pollution, not just to extend our lives, but because a clean environment is nice, makes our lives better. We've already made great strides. In much of America, the air is cleaner than it was 20 years ago. The water, too. We all support that. But how far do we want the government to go? Is there a point where we waste money trying to get things too clean? America's most expensive cleanup project is called Superfund. It's meant to clean up those toxic waste sites we've been talking about. Love Canal, Times Beach, 1,000 others. It's estimated the total cleanup will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Is the money well spent? Well, let's look at one small Superfund site in Colorado.
We think of Aspen as home of the jet set, great skiing, the good life. But Aspen, like much of the Rocky Mountains, was once home to lots of silver mines, like this one, Smuggler Mountain. 100 years ago, the Smuggler mine produced tons of silver. Today, most of it's closed, but its pollution remains. When you pull the silver out of ore, you're left with lots of lead. And tests have shown that in much of Aspen, the ground is loaded with lead. The lead can be a nasty poison. If enough of it gets into a child, it can interfere with coordination and lower IQ scores. But just because there's lead in the soil, does that necessarily mean it's harmful to the people? Chris Weiss thought so. He works as a toxicologist for the EPA.
Lead is poison and causes permanent brain damage. Even if a small amount of that material were absorbed into the blood, it would pose a problem, a serious problem for children.
So about 10 years ago, the Environmental Protection Agency warned the citizens of Aspen that they were in danger. In 1986, Smuggler was declared a toxic waste site, put on the Superfund list, and scheduled for cleanup. The EPA had ambitious plans. They'd remove 150 of these houses and then dig up all the dirt down to 4 feet, load that up onto dump trucks, and then those dump trucks, thousands of runs, would carry the dirt off.
I can't sleep at night. I wake up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
At first, people in Aspen were frightened about the lead and eager for the cleanup to begin.
I just can't stand it.
But then, some started talking to other scientists who said the EPA had exaggerated the problem.
We called the Colorado School of Mines, and everybody we talked to said this is bull.
On your mark, get set, go!
Some residents, like Patty Clapper, who would have been forced to leave her home because she lives with her family right in the middle of the toxic waste site, began to feel the cleanup would be more dangerous than the lead in the soil. Digging it up might put lead dust in the air. And thousands of truck runs didn't sound safe either. How dangerous could the lead be, thought Patty, since all the neighborhood kids had spent years using the toxic waste site as their playground. Eventually, Aspen asked local doctors to investigate the EPA's reasoning. Was lead in the soil as big a problem as the EPA said?
Are you taking care of Kara?
Dr. Robert Hunter headed a committee of doctors who searched through old hospital records. They couldn't find any cases of lead poisoning.
You can't find it in the kids. You can't find it in pregnant mothers. And the fact is, nobody's sick around here from lead toxicity. If you want to go to the hospital, I'll show you sick people. It's because they fell skiing. If you're really worried about health hazards, we should stop skiing. Can you wiggle your toe up and down for me?
Skiing is voluntary. Breathing isn't. The government must protect us from that.
I think sometimes we have to protect ourselves against the government. The government at this point has taken a teeny bit of data and exploded it into an $8 million mistake.
That's my question.
The more research Aspen did, the more they talked back to the
Very
EPA.
strongly that you're telling me that you need to protect my children. I feel like that is my job.
I want to give you the
I
option.
can protect my children. I don't need the EPA to do that for me.
Their values are different than ours. They're willing to accept risks that EPA doesn't feel are appropriate. They want proof from us that these risks are really harming them. And we don't want the dead bodies.
Mark Alston, EPA regional supervisor, was Chris Weiss's boss.
Keep in mind that for 100 years, these folks have seen, lived in, and worked around this kind of mine
So they're
waste.
just blind to the risk? They just don't
I
want
don't
to
think
see
they're
it?
blind to it. I think they're comfortable
But in
with it.
Aspen, they've never found a problem.
I disagree.
After 6 years of arguing, the residents of this neighborhood finally persuaded some doctors to test their blood. Now, the government considers lead levels above 10 micrograms per deciliter risky. Chris Weiss feared many Aspen kids would have much more than that. The EPA's hope was that after the cleanup, 95% of the people would have lead levels below 10. Astoundingly, the Aspen test showed that the residents' lead levels were already below 10. They averaged 3. That's among the lowest blood levels recorded anywhere in America. More astounding, the EPA still refused to take Aspen off the Superfund list and said they would still dig up the neighborhood because the lead in the soil around Smuggler was still a potential hazard.
They're going to clean my children up to a 1 in a million risk. Life is a greater risk than that.
Sooner or later, even if you're a good scientist, you got to go outside and you got to look around and you got to look for signs of disease. Go look. There's no disease.
Maybe it's yet to come.
Aspen's been around since the end of the 19th century. We've been here for well over 100 years.
With the lead.
With the lead. We've got a real good track record, and all you have to do is review the record.
Land of the free, home of the brave, hostages of the EPA.
Finally, after Aspen's mayor threatened to stand in front of the government's bulldozers, the EPA announced it would postpone the cleanup to give Chris Weiss time to take Aspen soil, force-feed it to pigs, and then slaughter the pigs to see how much lead they absorb.
You have the power to force a cleanup.
We have the authority to force a cleanup. The Superfund law is an extremely powerful law.
Ironically, while much of this was going on, the head of the EPA was Bill Riley. Riley says he agrees with the people in Aspen who say the cleanup is unnecessary.
My position on that is leave them alone.
If you agree with them, why didn't you stop the EPA?
I think we finally did accommodate their proposals, and we did not force the removal of all of that
EPA
dirt.
is still fighting with them, saying ought to be removed.
I thought that, that the agency had essentially accepted that analysis. If they haven't, they should have.
Well, finally, years after he left the EPA, and shortly after we first broadcast this report, the EPA did drop its demand that all the dirt be removed. Now Aspen officials just have to cover some of the old dirt with new dirt, and they must give the children regular blood tests to look for lead.
What I've told the EPA is if you want to save lives in this valley, build us a new road. Our road is what kills people here and maims people here, and it happens every month and it happens every year. And if you want to save us, build us a new road.
It's not what you're breathing or eating.
No, it's what you're driving.
Over the past 5 years, there have been 1,000 serious injuries on that road and 21 deaths. Yet little has been spent trying to make it safer. We'll be right back. I've given the EPA a hard time tonight, so I'd be remiss if I don't give myself a hard time too, because I've reported on risks that would hardly show up on this chart. Lawn chemicals, coffee makers, train accidents. Now, if we can help save just one life, that's a good thing. But if we kept things in perspective, I don't think so. Because consider the next item on this chart, smoking. Look at the difference. It takes 5.5 years off the average life. Now, this line is calculated differently because it applies only to smokers. Others are for all Americans. But the point is, isn't it a little silly for the smoker to worry about flying or his cellular phone? Now let's introduce a more startling idea. So far we've talked about focusing on the wrong risks, the wrong regulations. But what if simply having so many regulations kills people? How could that be? Well, look at the last item on the chart, poverty. Good studies in Europe, Canada, and the United States show that just being poor, typically in the bottom 20% of your country, shortens lifespans on average 7 to 10 years. It dwarfs everything else on the chart. And what does poverty have to do with regulation?
Well, economists say regulation makes a country a little poorer.
Yes, some jobs are created for regulators and others, but on balance, regulation acts as a brake on the economy. When it takes 5 years for the factory to get a permit to open, fewer people are employed. If pesticide use is restricted, food costs more, and people have less to spend on other things. Of course, some poor people die sooner because they abuse alcohol or are more likely to smoke than other people. But poverty also kills when people cannot afford some of the good things that keep us alive. Top-notch medical care, hygiene, good nutrition. We're all supposed to eat more fruit. Fruit's expensive. Poorer people are more likely to drive older, less safe cars with older tires, and so forth. What this suggests is that when we try to completely eliminate these smaller risks, when we try to take all the asbestos out of the schools and all the lead out of Aspen, in the name of prolonging lives, there's a good chance we're shortening lives by making more people poor. Yet we rarely take this into account when we spend billions trying to squeeze the last ounce of risk out of these smaller threats. Shouldn't we consider that? We'll be back in a moment. This discussion about risk raises the question, how should new products get approved? Do we want to let anybody introduce anything that might be dangerous? Or do we want to let the regulators keep it off the market for years? How should that be done? And what is safe? Let me throw out a hypothetical situation. Suppose I told you I had a new fuel that I wanted to sell you. And it's no cheaper than oil, but it would reduce our dependence on OPEC. It has no advantages over oil, but it would cost about the same. And the only problem with it is that it's highly explosive, unlike oil, which is just flammable. It's invisible and odorless, and I want to pump it into your house. So do you want this new fuel? You're the regulator. Yes? No? No? Who? Yes. Who says no? Why not? Most of you are saying no. All right, let's go over here. Stand up, please. Whoops, that's risky too, standing up.
Because it's explosive, so it would not be advantageous for us to have.
Suppose I could promise you it would only kill 10 Americans a year.
That's too many.
Wow.
10 too many. That's 10 too many Americans being killed.
Suppose it was 2 Americans.
Still too many.
Let me ask just some people up here. Would you approve this new fuel?
Could be gas that we use now that you're talking about. It seems to fit the description. It's highly explosive.
Well, that's actually right. Very good. You're one of the few people who guessed that. It's natural gas. We already use natural gas. It's highly explosive, invisible, odorless, and we pump it into your house. And it kills not 10 Americans a year, it kills 400 Americans a year. But we accept it because it's old technology. How about something less useful than natural gas? Suppose I had a toy, a recreational device I wanted to introduce that would kill 600 Americans a year and give several thousand other children brain damage so that they slowly died over several years. Would you approve this? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Bicycles? No, they do kill about 600. Balloons? No. Swimming pools? I mean, would anything get approved today? Would cars be approved today? I want to introduce a 2-ton machine that'll go 60 miles per hour, inches from pedestrians. And we want to let 16-year-olds drive them. Would airplanes be approved? We're going to put 300 people in an aluminum box and have it fly over a city? How will America compete in a world economy if we become so suspicious of everything new? Today we're exposed to far more dangerous-sounding chemicals and technologies than ever before. Pesticides, pollutants, bioengineering, electromagnetic fields, and the result? We live longer than ever. We forget that at the turn of the century, most people my age were already dead. And what's lengthened lifespans by 30 years just this century is the very technology we now fear so much. Thank you for watching. Good night.